Thank you. Haere mai ki tēnei hui, ki tāma ki makaurau. I want to honour, first of all, mana whenua, tai nui iwi, and for allowing us to gather today here on their whenua, on their land. We are beginning to claim little spaces here for ourselves on our mana whenua, and we're grateful for that warmth and the spirit with which Māori have received us and accommodated us here. Thank you for the intro. My story would last 60 years, but I'm trying to just capture it in 6 segments. So, first of all, I want to celebrate the life of a dear cousin, my tavale Timothy Ravanga, who just sent me home on a whirlwind tour last week to take him from Suva with his tavales, with his cousin, cousin tavale, cross cousins. He could have died in the village, but he chose to come and die in Suva so that the rest of us can take him home on the fiberglass boats on the very rough coral sea. And we just returned early this morning after doing that. And I said to Sharon, he just rewrote my story. So my tavale pretty much reflects my story as well. He was raised in the village, like me. We were both raised on the same village. I was born in my grandfather's home in Nairai, but I was raised as a chiefly little girl. That's why I'm plastered with a title called Andi. It's actually a title of responsibility, a badge of service, much more than as a decorative pedestal positioning. Then I was taken to my mother's village when I was very young, and that is across the reef from my own island. As has been mentioned, Batiki Island is where I was raised, where my tavale, who just passed, was born. And from a chiefly village, I was then raised in a tribe that, what we call the Matani Vanua, or they're like the emissary, the diplomatic tribe to the chief, or the talking chief in some other cultures. And so I was founded on a village, on a traditional combination of serving, but also being able, later on in my life, as I reflect, this would become very important to me in my calling later in my adult life. I also want to honor my mothers because I was whāngaid out, or kali, or weaned off from my mother's breast milk. And I had no mother, my biological mother, and I was separated by the ocean. And so I was raised by a few mothers. One of them is sitting in the audience, one of my mother's younger sisters. So I have a few of my mothers who raised me. So I am really the product of being raised by the village with several mothers and various other great qualities. I had the pleasure of meeting most of my mothers this week as well, as we all went back to Matiki to bury my tavale. And so, very much in the village, I learned how to be fearless. I actually survived. I learned to go and gather shellfish. I learned to do very basic village tasks that children my age, 2, 3, 4, 5, were already becoming competent in. So as I say, when I was raised by the village, I don't say it in a hip way that is now being bandied around. I actually say it in a manner that taught me to be sufficient, to be able to survive, to be able to feed my family as a child. I'll go and gather seashells, kaimoana, every morning, proudly, bringing a pot of that back home, where I get called a lot as singawale. You know, that's a little girl's thing. Go to the sand and you scrape the sand and all these wonderful singawales come out. Delicious kaimoanas, wonderful breakfast, and I still try and do that today, except that there's very few of them left on our beachfront. And so these are little things that I learned: numeracy, I learned literacy, I learned confidence. My family would say, look at how clever this girl is. And look, she's fed us breakfast this morning. And those were wonderful affirmations that I was founded in. I also want to honor my school. Adi Asenaca is an iconic school in Fiji for indigenous women that the New Zealand government was kind enough to set up 71 years ago. So on the 2nd of October, we celebrate our 71st birthday as a school that I want to also acknowledge in the audience, Litia, who is actually the great-granddaughter of the late Litia Vakumbau, who the school is named after, a chiefly woman of Mbau, and of close connections in the Pacific to Tonga royalty, a royal family. And so you can see that raised in the village is actually much bigger than just, you'll see very frequently being mentioned in project plans and stuff like that. They actually don't, they actually need to see the details that do go into being raised by the village. So in this past week, I returned home, and it was really about recalling things that I had been raised in, and being able also to apply and to reconfirm that Fiji is still my home, and that no one can take away from me. It's in my DNA, it's in my blood, and we have blood connections. These are things you cannot manufacture. We cannot fabricate my home. Fiji is my home. New Zealand is my home too. But as I believe in the Bible as well, the Bible also says, I'm just a visitor here. This is just a temporary home. I will go home one day. And sometimes we do battle and fight and argue and waste a lot of great and valuable time debating things that we probably can find more productive solutions to. And so Fiji is my home, and I am just here temporarily. I honor things Māori. I learn to speak te reo. I try and follow tikanga Māori, but it's really very similar to Fijian. E wakarau in tova vanua and wakarau Viti. So it's, I'm akin to them. But I just want to declare that I'm not going to be a Māori out of that. It does not make me Māori because it's not in my DNA. So I still have to honor and respect things Māori and tangata whenua and the mana whenua of this land on Mangere, where we stand right now. We still respect that. And I don't also want to debate the Wulangi debate, as I can agree with Sharon. It is very distracting. Far more important issues are running under there. I then moved to Suva. I'm called Susumanrai. Most of my life, I'm Susumanrai. This is an expression Fijians call each other when we are like white Fijians. Suva Fijians, you know. We eat bread. Our staple is bread and tea. Or Susumanrai, can't speak Fijian properly, etc., etc. I can tell you, I'm not Susumanrai, because I also want to celebrate this week that we are on the 7th year of the Viti, or the annual Fijian Language Week, which some of my team are here from the Fiji Community Association of Auckland. Back in 2013, we initiated the very first Fijian Language Week in Aotearoa. So we're grateful that we seem to have got there even before Te Reo Māori, and I'm very embarrassed about that, because I think it should always be in the reverse, that Māori should always be celebrated as first language. However, so I'm happy to say that Genda project today is on the eve of the 7th Fijian Language Week in Aotearoa, New Zealand. And I am very fluent. I might be Susumanrai, but I'm still very fluent. And having said that, you would believe that I actually started school in Bhawani Dayal Memorial School. So that's the Arya Samaj school in Nasinu. So totally by default, I think, because it was the closest school to where my grandmother could take me. Half a day later, I finished. I was that close to my grandmother who raised me that I couldn't be separated from her. And so I was the first Fijian child in Bhawani Dayal. And so I had to speak Hindi pretty quickly, fluently. But, I also learned to read and write Hindi. So all the alphabets I learned from my day school, I would take home and read the Bible to my grandmother in Fijian. And so the amazing things that happen is it also encouraged me to be multilingual so early. But suddenly, when I came from the village, I had relatives, Indian relatives in my village. We had the Khans, the Shamima Alis, those are my relatives from my Nairai village. And then we have also in my Vasu village in Batik, we also have our own Indian families there. So we were quite comfortable with our Fijian families there. They spoke fluent Fijian, they dressed like us, and we, the only difference is they look a little bit different from us. But when I came to Suva and I was in Bawani, that was totally different. There was a lot more, way more Indians. And they all don't speak Fijian at all, some, or if they do, broken. And so it was a whole new environment too for me. Then I was sent to Sambeto District School. From an Indian school, I was sent to a village school in the west. And I turned up there as a little Indian girl with my pink and white uniform and long hair. And I behaved like an Indian girl, took my powder and the handkerchief. And, we're ready to powder ourselves. And they made fun of me, of course, as you expect, village children. Call me every other name. I'm Gurukul, I'm this Indian girl and that. Totally water off a duck's back because I didn't understand that village mentality. And I quickly told the teacher, and so they got the stick, and this one was doing that. And then from there I was sent to Adi Asenaca school. This is a school that really, as you can expect, left a big imprint in my life. I started to develop an interest in activism, in political activism, because we had old girls of Adi Asenaca school that turned up to school and talked to us about nuclear-free testing in the Pacific, and how the French were making nuclear bombs, and how they were singing wonderful songs, and I loved their keftans. They would turn up to Adi Asenaca and tell us to be agitated, and so that was really the seed of activism for me, and that would become a bit of a trademark of my life. After I left Fiji, I was not only a young feminist to be, but I was very much an agitator, an activator. We see a little bit of injustice somewhere, we stand up. We must express our the truth that if we stand for nonviolence, if we stand for democracy, and if we stand for injustice, we need to voice it. We need to speak it. You find me in New Zealand. I'd walk into the University of Auckland, young, bright native girl from Fiji, very Fijian. I had to quickly put on lipstick. It was a little bit difficult trying to fit in, so that the frizzy hair and the buninga was like starting to look a little bit different. And it's a whole new environment, the University of Auckland. But was very quickly absorbed into the student life, activism in the 70s. It wasn't user-paced, so we sort of had very affordable university education in those days. And yes, we had the Springbok tour. South African rugby team was coming to New Zealand. And then we had major protests, and it was exciting for this young Fijian girl that was by then only aware of the nuclear-free testings in the Pacific. I was being groomed in many ways in preparation for the 1987 military coup in Fiji when Rabuka took power over a democratically elected government of Dr. Timothy Bavandra. It was a difficult time for us. It was a difficult time for Fijians. It was a difficult time for Fijians abroad because of the way that event was presented. And so a lot of us Fijians were on the other side. But I and probably a handful were stupid enough to be standing in the front of the protest movement. We were protesting in Auckland, in New Zealand, up and down country. We had other groups there. And I was often called names, and I was often accused of being paid by the Indians to be their speaker. So I have my own intelligence or my own intellectual capability to stand for the truth that I know, that I have studied at the university, that I myself have always known, was being questioned and challenged. I was being told to go and wash the pots, just go back and go and maskuro, or just go and, I said, that's fine, I've done that too. Actually, I did that as a child. I'm very competent in washing pots. I even went to the sea and collected the linga-linga and how to make the pot shiner than shine, and natural remedies. So I was being, and it's not always easy. I was so grateful that I had a few other Fiji friends would kind of, hold us up. And so I was also asked to go back to Fiji, go and show yourself there, go and work there. Why do you come and shout and scream over here and not be brave and go back home to do that? But also, at the time for us, it was really not about becoming a TV celebrity or some news, some well-known person. It was really about encouraging our own people in Fiji to engage in discourse and debate, and knowing what exactly is happening under all that talk of reclaiming back the power. So from then on, what would happen is I was being prepared for a return home. Things do happen. I then had to return to Fiji. I went home. My son and I would go and heal back home. I had to take on a government job, not very easy, with a name like yours that's associated with anti-democracy stuff. And with some persuasion, I was able to be employed in the government legal services in Fiji. And would you believe, from that point, I was in government service when another coup happened in 1999. So I was really in a difficult situation. Now what do I do? Do I go and protest or as a government servant? Or I was being posted to the United Nations as a diplomat for the Fiji permanent mission to the United Nations. And I felt like I shouldn't go. I need to stay here now. The coup has happened. I need to help my country. But I went because I was told to go. And I did a lot of work cleaning up at that level to help Fiji regain its image and the Pacific. And so that's when my activism, my agitator, hat was kind of refined, was smoothed over. I can't keep behaving like an activist. I'm not expected to be a diplomat and have some decorum and exercise good sense and negotiate calmly without shouting, we want democracy or we want freedom. So that was an experience that I need to always live up to. Serving my government. I believe I have done justice to that. That little short stint of 4 years in the United Nations, I believed was also just to show that you can come back and help your own government. I am never in a position to attack my government. I've become a civil servant. I'm loyal to the government of Fiji. However, resigned from this government in 2008 to return home with my son to New Zealand, to my other home, which is actually my son's second home. He is a Viti. He is a coconut in reverse. He's a kaivalangi on the outside, but really is a Viti. So what do they call it? White on the outside, but brown on the inside. So I had to leave the government service. But I just want to say that, nothing there was random. I would later learn that Mr. Bhawani Dayal, which was my first formal school, happened to have been a South African anti-apartheid activist back in the days. Because I never heard of his name in Fiji except for the school I attended. I was quite amazed that one of my biggest passions back in the late 70s and early 80s was the whole anti-apartheid protests and our whole fight for justice wherever there is. My whole life has always been about, I have a discerning eye for injustice and for things that ought to be put right. We have fought for the Pacific, for freedom and for liberation struggles and for independence of our indigenous peoples. Great to see Kānaki reaching some level of autonomy, self-autonomy in New Caledonia, also in Bougainville. Timor-Leste, one of the greatest joy was writing a speech for my ambassador in the United Nations in the year 2000 at the Millennium Summit, when we were welcoming some of the Pacific members of the family, including Timor-Leste, into the United Nations family. And there are still more in the Pacific. We still have West Papua, is another Pacific nation that just needs our little bit of prayer and our compassion and our support to ensure that, in the 21st century, the United Nations is also 70 years old or something incredibly old like that, and this is the time of enlightenment. I just encourage us that we can be debating over our homes and where our home is, but you can't. There are people who are fighting to even have their home, just to be able to reclaim their home back to themselves. And I just want to end this talk with a great celebration of the great achievements we've had in freeing people up, in freeing up our people that have faced injustices. And right here on Aotearoa, it's great to see that we are also coming to great support with our Māori people who have given us a home here as well. So tēnā koutou katoa.